And welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar series, Israel Insider with Mr. Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 10 to 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to all questions, but we have many participants on this webinar, so I apologize in advance if we do not get to yours today. And now, with no further ado, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening. It's been another tumultuous week in Israel. If last week's buzzword, as I said, was disconnected, there was a feeling of major disconnect between the public and the political level. Well, Saturday night saw a major demonstration. Thousands of Israelis, some say 10,000, perhaps even more, take to the streets, especially in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square, which is the center for many demonstrations over the years. Basically, the rally was called Disconnected and We've Had Enough. And so we've seen quite a few demonstrations, even strikes over the last week, culminating in one last night outside the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem, which again saw a couple of thousand people, but it descended into violence. Unfortunately, like a lot of these things, you know, they attract certain elements. This one attracted and has attracted, you know, what some describe as an anarchist element, which was just there to cause trouble, to try and embolden a more aggressive police response. And that's certainly what happened. There were pictures of Israeli journalists being attacked, having their microphones thrown out of their hands. It was just fairly wild scenes, but what had started as a relatively peaceful but certainly angry demonstration, just these were the scenes that you know, a lot of people who feel very aggrieved by the situation certainly didn't want to see. They were probably additionally grieved by the fact that not only, you know, for security reasons, separating them from the Prime Minister's office, interestingly enough, there was a big black banner put across, so no one in the Prime Minister's residence would even be able to see the demonstration. And a lot of people felt that this was an example or a paradigm for this disconnect, that they don't want to see or hear what's going on. And again, this week, while a lot of people are really angry about the situation, politics continued. The angst and the anger and the mistrust between the two leading parties in the coalition, Blue and White and Likud, continued with threats to break up the coalition. Again, we hear that if a budget isn't passed by, according to coalition agreement, the 15th of August, but at least by the end of August, then we're automatically going back to elections. And a major sticking point, again, is this point of whether it will be a 2-year budget, which was written into the coalition agreement and something Prime Minister Netanyahu has long advocated for, or a 1-year budget, because now Prime Minister Netanyahu says, with certain economic expertise backing, that we need a 1 year at a time budget, because we don't know what 2021 will bring with all this uncertainty enveloping the economic and financial world. Why Benny Gantz is so against it is because in Israeli politics, if you don't pass a budget by a certain point, we automatically go for elections. And as we know that there is this agreement between Benny Gantz and Netanyahu that Benny Gantz will become prime minister in November 2021. So Gantz and his people certainly feel that Netanyahu is preparing a trap to ensure that Gantz will never become prime minister at this date. And you know, it will be seen as out of his hands, and he can blame Blue and White for this. So there doesn't seem to be any common ground. There's been meetings that really result into shouting matches. At the moment, Benny Gantz, like a number of politicians, is in isolation because they came into contact with someone who has coronavirus. Not that they themselves have it. They've tested negative, but the stipulations are in Israel. If you come into contact with someone, then you have to go into 14-day isolation. So there's quite a few politicians who are in isolation at this point. Today was a very interesting day. Again, you could argue that the average Israeli citizen was just far removed from this, but there was a debate over, every government has to have a certain political representation on panels to elect justices, and also religious justices, dayanim as they're called, and even qadis for the Muslim world, for the Jewish world. And these are actually, they sound relatively unimportant, but they really are very important, especially when the justice system is such a major factor in our political life here. And the dislike for one nominee in particular, Ayelet Shaked, who is with Naftali Bennett in the Yamina party, who is someone that the Netanyahus, and I say in plural because there's a lot of speculation that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu's wife, Sarah Netanyahu in particular, has great distaste for Ayelet Shaked. So Netanyahu spent a lot of time with his allies trying to ensure that Ayelet Shaked did not get on this committee, and basically threatened his own party and members in his coalition that if they vote for Ayelet Shaked and she gets in, that could be another casus belli to go to elections, which again is something that the public can't really understand with everything that's going on, why this is such an important element. Earlier in the week, we saw something really extraordinary when we saw a member of the Likud, basically just to take a step backwards, when this government was formed, again, we were told that this would focus on the coronavirus, battling the coronavirus and the economic ramifications that were attendant to this global pandemic. And to that end, a special committee was created in the Knesset called the Corona Committee, which is one that would debate all the steps that would deal with the coronavirus and the economic effects and the shutdowns and the measures, et cetera, et cetera. There was a big debate whether swimming pools and gyms would be closed again because we've been seeing in Israel the numbers have just got higher and higher. So the government is trying to lower them, obviously, and take certain steps. Prime Minister Netanyahu and his allies, specifically coalition chairman Miki Zohar, basically sent a message to the chairwoman of the committee, Yifat Shasha Biton, that they must not have a vote on keeping the gyms open and the swimming pools open, or at least to ensure that the vote to close passes. In the end, she decided that they would have a vote. She voted to keep them open. And Miki Zohar, which was caught on camera, basically approached her and said, "Have a nice life. You are finished in politics. You are finished in Likud," and immediately returned to his office and sent a letter to the Knesset chairman, Yoav Levin of his party, recommending that she be replaced within the Likud. In the end, the Likud legal system looked into that and said it was an illegal request. So it's basically decided they're going to try and sidestep her committee and sidetrack her, that they won't put any decisions through there. And again, this caused a lot of resentment, a lot of anger that, the Knesset, the parliament, the legislature is supposed to be one of those checks and balances on the government. That's the way the system's supposed to work. So if it's basically just supposed to be a rubber stamp, then it's not doing its job. But we saw again a problematic challenge to that very nature of the governmental system in Israel this week, and it caused a lot of anger, a lot of finger pointing across the aisle and within the government again. Basically, it's just gone from one sort of crisis to the other. The numbers are going up of coronavirus. The unemployed numbers are rising. The economy is certainly in a lot of trouble. And Netanyahu's approval ratings have just gone lower and lower. Last week, we talked about how he went from 75% approval rating down to, I believe it was 52, 53, 54. Well, now it's much, much lower. There's only around 16% approval rating for the government's handling of this crisis. And Netanyahu is starting to get a lot of flack, even from his base. And I think that's a very important point that should be made, is that his base is those from a lower economic strata, and these are the people who are suffering. The self-employed, the small business owners, they're the ones screaming out for help, and they're not getting it, even though there was a payment given this week to those those people who are self-employed and small business owners. And Netanyahu himself put out with Finance Minister Katz what is supposed to be a major proposal to help the economy. But it's clear that the people are not quite buying into it yet. So we saw today something which some have characterized as a little bit desperate, where Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically giving every single family between 2,000 and 3,000 shekels. I guess that's maybe $500, $600, $700, $800, something which the finance ministry officials are very much against, something which a lot of financial commentators do not see what it's going to do. And again, the small business owners, the self-employed are saying, we're screaming out for money, and now they're basically just giving out to everyone, regardless of whether they need it. But what I think this really says is that Netanyahu needs a win. And I think this is going to be a very short tactical win. It will not last. People will pocket that whenever it reaches our accounts, if it reaches accounts. We've heard these kinds of things before, and they don't necessarily come through. But it just speaks to a certain level of desperation on behalf of the Prime Minister and his allies at this point, that this is something that they arrived at very, very quickly. We've heard from the health minister that we are just days away from another complete lockdown. They're probably in the next couple of days going to try and push as much as possible to be closeted without the economy being hurt. But it seems that we are getting very, very close to a lockdown as the numbers continue to rise. We've had record numbers of positive infections day after day. The numbers are starting to go up for those in more serious conditions, those on breathing machines, and the numbers of people who are passing away. It's still relatively low in comparison with other countries. And Netanyahu touted a report by the British Financial Times said that Israel is only one of 3 countries, which I think it was in the OECD, where the numbers of those who died in the preceding months is even lower than it was in 2019. So our numbers for those who have died on a monthly basis has not gone up. Obviously, most of the OECD countries, the US, parts of Europe, etc., certainly the numbers have gone up. But Israel hasn't seen that. And Netanyahu is touting that as a win, as a victory, as a response to his particular policies. But it's certainly not one that's going to make waves in the Israeli public, and the Israeli public, which is certainly losing faith in him and his government to deal with this response. And if a budget isn't passed within now a month, maybe 5-6 weeks at the most, we are going back to elections. And Netanyahu is certainly going to be in a poorer place because of it. His poll numbers of his party are going down. They're still pretty healthy in the 30s, but I think we'll see that continue to drop. So I'm not sure exactly where that leads us. I said last week that there are 2 schools of thought. One, that Netanyahu does not want elections because the numbers are looking so bad. Another school of thought, which is that he needs elections before Gantz gets into the Prime Minister's office. So next year will be far, far worse than what we're seeing at the moment. So it's better to take the relatively bad results rather than the very bad results that could happen next year. So it remains to be seen which of those viewpoints wins out. I'm of the school of thought that I still don't necessarily see elections, but I certainly feel that they could happen. I don't rule them out. In Israel, you can never rule those types of things out. And this government just does not seem to be able to work together on almost any issue. And there's daily threats. We saw in the news before on Channel 12, I believe it was, Benny Gantz give an interview, and I've rarely seen him so agitated and aggressive. So obviously he's feeling the heat. So it just remains to be seen whether the 2 parties can really get together and just work for the good of the nation in such a trying time. And with that, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Great, thank you so much for the enlightening update as always. First question we have is, how do you think Gantz would do in a new election now that he lost Yesh Atid?
If he was to be running on his own, blue and white, the polls show him barely getting into double figures. He's not making much of an impact, it doesn't seem. His support does seem to be going more to Yesh Atid, to Yair Lapid as the leader of the opposition. Obviously, he's able to strike a certain amount of blows to the government amongst the public, which is losing faith in that government. So then those sort of, let's say, center to center left, those who object to what the government is doing can certainly find a voice in Yair Lapid, where it's far more difficult for Benny Gantz to sort of rail against the government yet remain part of it. So he's stabilized at sort of 10 to 12 seats at this point. He also has, he mentioned today that in his sort of, let's say, a block at the moment, he also has Tzvika Hauser and Yoaz Hendel, party Derech Eretz, which isn't supposed to pass the threshold for getting into the Knesset, and also even the Labour Party is part of his bloc. Amir Peretz, which again is sinking below the threshold, so they're not going to give him much. So he's certainly not in a good position to go to elections, and he'll be cut in at least half of his current total.
Thank you. So there's clearly so much going on within the government right now, but is annexation dead?
It's not dead, but it's certainly on life support. It is not on the agenda. The senior members of the government admitted it this week. They said that it's not on the agenda. It's on the Americans' agenda. The American administration certainly doesn't have an attention span for this at this point. There's been a sort of game that's being played where the Americans are blaming it on blue and white not being on board, and blue and white are sort of happy to take that position as the ones who are blocking it. But just at the moment, there's no great stomach for it. It will be a hard sell at this point. I've spoken before that I don't believe that Netanyahu will do anything more than a symbolic annexation, and I certainly hold that to be true. So I think it would be a hard sell in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of this unprecedented economic meltdown, for him to take such a drastic step that would, who knows what ramifications would come of it. So I think it's certainly off the agenda at the moment, but obviously, what the Israelis feel that there's a window of opportunity here before the election period, the most intense election period, and then possibly, whether President Trump gets reelected or not, that's certainly a gamble. So the window of opportunity that the Israeli government was always talking about certainly receding by the day, but at the moment, they don't have the attention span for it. I'm not sure if the general public have the stomach for it. Even when it was at its height, when everyone was talking about it, I think only about 6 to 7% of Israelis said that this was, a priority for them. And I can imagine that that's sinking greatly. So I don't think that there's much pressure coming from the public, and I don't think the politicians have much of a stomach for it at the moment.
Thank you. Are schools closed for summer, and do they plan to reopen? And if so, or if they are still open, can you speak to the number of children who have coronavirus?
Well, the schools have ended. For the lower grades and the kindergartens, they have a summer program at the moment where they're basically in the classrooms frequently with the same teachers, but they're not learning like they were during the year. This is to ensure that parents can get out to work. Sometimes at this point, you would have to pay for extra some sort of summer activities for your kids. So they're trying to help those who need to go out and work to give them sort of this free summer classes, let's say. But that ends early August. And that's only really, I believe, up to second or third grades, maybe even just second grade. I have a son in the second grade, so I know he's in it. And a daughter in kindergarten, so they're in that. But above the age of, I think, 8 or 9, they're pretty much out of school, and there's no summer camps in Israel. There's very little summer activities. Obviously, the cinemas are not open. Many things are not open. The swimming pools are open for the moment. The beaches are open for the moment, but there's talk of closing both of those down in the coming days. As far as September, when the schools return in Israel September 1st. So far, the education minister has said that up to, I believe, again, 3rd or 4th grade, there'll be classes of up to 20 children at a time. Israeli classes can go from 30, 35, even 40 to a class. And those above that will only go in once a week and have remote learning. So that's what's being talked about at this point in time. But they did say that everything's still open. And in Israel, with strikes, with threats from various lobbies, with the situation so much up in the air, it could really go either way. So September 1st is quite a way off. A lot of people are also talking about the high holy days on the Jewish calendar, which take place only a few weeks later, whether there'll be a full lockdown for those as there was for Passover, because that could be a major spread, because these are very family-oriented holidays where people travel around the country to visit their children, to visit their parents, friends, loved ones. So the government's certainly worried about that, but they haven't come out with any regulations at this point for that yet.
Thank you. So Netanyahu is being blamed for the effects of the pandemic. What do his critics believe he should have done instead?
Well, he's not being blamed for the coronavirus. No one's blaming him for starting it. But what some say is, the first wave, the government responded pretty well, shut down, as much as possible, as early as possible. And we didn't see many deaths. We didn't see that many people seriously ill with the coronavirus. And we did better than probably most countries around the world. What he is being blamed for is not reacting on an economic level, because we see now still over 20% of the population unemployed. Before coronavirus, it was 4%. And also the economic assistance, it's now in the middle of July and only now has a significant aid package, a sort of holistic aid package really being presented. It hasn't even been fully passed yet. So I think that's what a lot of people are blaming him for that. But as I've said for a while, and I've seen it in campaigns that I work on around the world, that it doesn't really matter what Netanyahu would or wouldn't have done. Obviously, they have a certain leeway, but there is this idea that a crisis usually leads to a mistrust, a discontent amongst the population. So you look to the leadership, and that's who you tend to blame. So there is a certain level of anger specifically about Netanyahu. It's coupled with his particular legal troubles, which are ongoing. It's coupled with sort of a fraught society. It's added to the fact that people are out of work, regardless of what he would have done. People who haven't got enough food, for themselves. I see a disconnect between the government and the people. When you have senior government ministers say that there's no such thing as hunger in Israel, and then you have the government dealing with issues completely unrelated to coronavirus and spending a lot of time on it. Again, with the fact that the finance committee, which is supposed to be in charge of, dispersing money and deciding on budgets, spent a whole day during one of the worst crises in the history of our country, deciding how much tax relief they would give the prime minister and how much they would give to cleaning up his home, his private home in Caesarea, and how much his lawn would be mowed, and at the expense of the average person. So I think a lot of these factors, this, as I said, this disconnect has led to really sinking approval ratings for Netanyahu. So there's certainly a lot of discontent and opposition to some of the steps he's taken. Very little has been said about what they would do instead. For example, there are those who say, just giving out 2,000 or 3,000 shekels just to every single person in the country is irresponsible. That should be done to those, given and provided to those who need it, not just to everybody. So there is certainly opposition to that, but very little sort of, holistic plans have been released to go against what Netanyahu has done at this point.
Thank you. See, you were talking about the protesters when we first began our webinar. We had quite a few viewers join a little late, might have missed out. Can you just reiterate what the causes or the issues that brought the protesters out? And what have they given any sort of, not demands, but a softer word?
I mean, the central demand for a lot of the protesters is simply Netanyahu go home, Netanyahu resign, Netanyahu stop being disconnected, Netanyahu help us. there are a lot of different causes, as we've seen. We've seen that, there are the general, this is a very difficult time and we're taking to the streets to send a message that we expect more by government. There's this idea, and we see it around the world, that, governments are giving money out and helping people, and the government, sort of gives this impression that they're being generous, and the people are saying, well, this is our money. We're paying month after month, year after year, specifically for these kind of situations. Again, you can argue the wider economic ideas behind this, but that's what the people think. Then you get those who are just against Netanyahu no matter what he does. There are those who are calling him in, continue to call on him to resign because he's embroiled in so many criminal investigations. And then there are those anarchists, even you've seen communist flags out there, who are basically just looking to cause any sort of disruption. And I think those are the ones who caused the level of aggression, the level of violence yesterday. You could see it. You could see the flags that they were holding. You could see the banners, the wording, what they were shouting. And then that happens in a lot of places in the West, that you get these usually youngsters who are just, sort of looking for trouble. And unfortunately, it distracts from what are supposed to be demonstrations really around an issue. But these demonstrations are growing. There's call for another one on Saturday night, but at the moment hasn't been allowed by the police. But I think as the anger grows, the numbers will grow, and it will be a real test for this government.
Thank you. Yes, we've certainly seen that here as well. If they do go to the fourth election, who do you think would be in a better position to lead Israel?
Well, according to the polls, it would still remain Netanyahu, because in Israel, you don't have to win outright an election. It's not like in the States or in other places, it's just a first past the post. It's so, a presidential or prime ministerial candidate, one against the other. In Israel, all you have to do is be the largest party in the larger bloc. Generally, there are sort of two blocks: the left secular bloc and the right religious bloc. The right religious bloc has held power on and off for at least the last 4 decades, with various exceptions. And the Likud has always been the largest party in that bloc. So the leader of the Likud tends to be the one most likely to put together a coalition. And the next largest party in the right-wing religious bloc is Yamina, Naftali Bennett's party, which at the moment has 6 seats, but according to the most recent poll, could get as many as 14 seats, which would be a tremendous achievement for him. Obviously, polls are not election results, but 14 is still quite far from Likud's mid to low 30s. So if elections happen tomorrow, the likelihood is that Netanyahu would still be in a good position to form a government. The crucial thing is, would he and his allies be able to get that 61? They were not able to last time. That's why he had to invite Benny Gantz, and also Bennett was not brought into this coalition. So although he's an obvious ally, there's a lot of personal animosity there. Could he possibly take his up to 14 seats and look for a way to push Netanyahu aside? And then there's the all-important question, which I believe is always the most important question, is whether the Likud, there would be some sort of internal conflict and enough rebels to sort of try and unseat Netanyahu before, during, or after the elections. I think that's unlikely at this point, but it still remains possible, especially with the fourth election.
Do you think that the protest will help push a budget through?
I mean, it's not the focus. The budgetary issues are always the most complex in Israel. They brought down probably more governments than anything else. They're the most controversial. Every single sort of line is poured over, and even the fact that we haven't even got to the budget discussions at this point is already a bit of a problem. I think that it's in no one's interest for a budget not to be written and we go to fourth elections. I think at the moment it is still flexing muscles. I talked many months back during coalition negotiations that this is like a game of chicken. And this is another game of chicken that Gantz and Netanyahu are both trying to flex their muscles. Gantz does not want to give Netanyahu another out. Netanyahu wants that out. Netanyahu wants his way. Netanyahu wants to remain prime minister for as long as possible. But at the moment, neither are coming down from the tree that they've climbed up. So it really remains to see how this one will be played out. But I believe that both eventually will come down. I believe that we will have a budget. We'll find some innovation to sort of square that circle between a 1 and 2 year budget, perhaps a 1 year budget, but something locked in to ensure that Netanyahu doesn't have this escape sort of clause further down the line that we talked about before. But it's certainly going to come down to the wire.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar today. Thank you again for taking the time to update us this week. Please be sure to tune in next week to see what will unfold. On Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we will be having Todd Bensman here discussing drawing lessons from Europe's experience with jihadi border infiltration. Thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.